I know what it's like to be at rock bottom. I know what it's like to be damaged by benzos. And I know that it's possible to come through the other side. And I think for me personally, having a purpose of getting to do that, being able to do that for other people absolutely enriches my life. I mean, those purposes are everything to me today.
Hi, I'm Dr. Joseph Witt-Doering. It's my pleasure to have Dan here today. Dan suffered from protracted withdrawal injury from benzodiazepines. He's now recovered, and he's recently started doing coaching. He's very kindly agreed to come on and talk about his story with benzodiazepines and his journey. So, Dan, welcome. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and do this. I always think a good place to start is if, it's kind of like at the beginning, how did you end up on benzodiazepines in the first place? What was kind of going on?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for asking. So my first psychiatrist was a dishwasher at the restaurant that I worked at when I was about 21. Yeah. So this was probably back around 2002, 2003 era. So I started taking them, and I realized right off the bat that these drugs were powerful because they alleviated my anxiety so well and so thoroughly. I'd never experienced anything else like that. So I knew that there was something to these drugs right away. And after doing that for a while, I went to my GP. And
let me ask you this. Was he just like, hey, man, I got some Xanax. Do you want to try it? Or were you just like, or could he see that you were stressed? Or was he just like, hey, just take these. Like, maybe they're fun to fool around with. Like what? Like how did that happen?
Yeah. Oh, no, he just had some prescriptions sitting out that he would just kind of let everybody in the restaurant see so that we knew that he had stuff, and there were some people like myself who were, prone to ask like, hey, what is that? What do you got there? Because I knew he had other stuff too, because I also liked opiates quite a bit, and he had those. So I was into opiates prior to ever trying a benzodiazepine. But when I saw that, I said, I don't know what it was. It was either alprazolam or Ativan, one of those two. And I was like, I've heard of it, but I didn't know what it does. So I was very curious about it when I saw that he had those. Yeah.
And were you
asking about them?
And were you having any problems with addiction or anything? Or is this just kind of like experimenting with different drugs? Like, this is kind of fun. I like this, just when you're out. Or was any of that stuff a problem kind of when you guys crossed paths?
Oh, I was definitely down the road of addiction quite a few years by this point. I think I was, 21, 22 and I had already been, I'd had problems with alcohol, opiates, marijuana. And I was just getting into pills around this time, cocaine. Eventually I would go try heroin and some other stuff, pretty much anything that would come along. So I was already kind of there by that point.
Okay.
Yeah. So
walk us forward from there. You kind of get a taste of this, of benzodiazepines. You like what you experience, and then I guess shortly thereafter you go to the GP and, take us from there.
Yeah, sure. So, after buying them from my dishwasher for a while, I go to my GP, and I kind of just played dumb. I said, I'm really struggling with anxiety, with sleep, depression, and, can you recommend anything to help me out? And I had already been on an antidepressant by this point since I was 17 or 18, by the way. So that was actually my first prescription I ever tried. But, you say the right words and the doctor's like, oh yeah, we have this drug, alprazolam. I'm like, oh really? Okay. Yeah.
Never heard of that before. Yeah.
Yeah. What's that?
Yeah.
And so gave me, I think 0.5 milligrams of alprazolam to take twice a day. And so that kind of started out. And then I did start taking it as prescribed when I got it from him, because I did notice that it had a therapeutic effect that I liked, and it helped me cut down on my drinking. So those two things kind of went hand in hand for me. I figured if I could get on this medication and it would help cut my drinking down and I could function better, I could live a better life. And that's kind of how I got started going down the doctor route.
Okay. And so how long did that go on where it was kind of just this period of stability with the Xanax until you kind of ended up in trouble?
So that was quite a few years. From when I first started taking it from my GP, I'd say I went from 2003 to 2009, and I was taking it consistently and without much issue at all. And then all of a sudden, something happened in 2009 where it just stopped working, and it was almost like overnight. It was so fast. And I was in college at this point. I was getting my bachelor's degree, and I was just about a year off from getting that. And I'm like, oh my God, I had these debilitating panic attacks, crippling depression, felt horrible. And I knew what was going on because, I'd been taking them for a while. I experimented with them before taking them from my doctor. So I knew that they stopped working. And I knew that I had to either up my dose or come off of them. And I couldn't just stop taking them. I mean, if I would skip a dose, I would be in like sheer terror, panic, sweating, confusion, derealization, depersonalization. So I felt like I was screwed. I was like caught between a rock and a hard place. Like, what do I do? So I ended up going to a psychiatrist at the university I was attending. And she just said, well, you just need more. You just need to up your dose. Like, it was as simple as that. And I said, well, yeah, I know. I know that would like help me in the interim, but I'm also thinking about years down the road. Like, what do I do? Am I just going to have to keep upping my dose, ad infinitum until eternity, until I'm, an old man? Like, I don't want to do that. But I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. And so she gave me Xanax XR, and I started taking that, and it helped. And I took that for, a few months. Then I was like, I don't really like this one. It's not working. She switched me to Ativan, which started working better. And then I took that for a few years, and then that stopped working. And then I was like, oh crap. Now I've been on these things for 10 years, and now I don't know what to do. I had a daughter. I had a teaching job. And I had a lot to lose. And once the Ativan stopped working, I got really scared because I thought, what am I going to do? My life is about to fall apart. I can't hold it together. My mental stability is completely slipping. My opiate addiction was spiraling out of control, and I was just going downhill fast. So I went to a new psychiatrist, and he prescribed me Klonopin, I think 2 milligrams a day. And when I started taking the Klonopin, I noticed that it kind of smoothed out. It kind of eased up a little bit. And I did that for about another year. And eventually I got to a place where I was like, listen, I have to do something about this opiate addiction. I know there's a drug called Suboxone. And he refers me to another doctor in his practice who prescribes Suboxone. So I go to him, and he gives me Suboxone and also upped my Klonopin from 2 milligrams a day to 5 milligrams a day. Gave me a prescription called Vyvanse, which is a stimulant on top of
Jesus
that.
Jesus Christ. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
What was the Vyvanse for? Just for like the amount of Klonopin you were on? I don't know. Yeah.
So, oh man, this is.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Obviously for an ADHD indication, I imagine you told him you're having difficulty concentrating at the time. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you exactly what happened, actually.
Yeah.
I walked in, and he looked at me, and he goes, do you ever get tired at work? And I said, well, yeah, sometimes. And he literally said, this drug kicks ass. And then he took out his pencil and his notebook, and he started writing me a prescription for, I didn't even know what at the time.
Yeah.
But that's literally what happened. That's literally what he said. And of course, me being me at the time, I wasn't going to say no to him. I was just like, oh, another drug. Yeah. Throw another pill in the mix. Whatever. What do I care?
I mean, you got like the kind of the trifecta that everyone wants from their psychiatrist. You came out with like, Suboxone, 5 milligrams of Klonopin and Vyvanse.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I did. I thought I struck gold at the time.
Yeah.
I really did. Yeah. And of course, looking back on it, I mean, I went completely sideways. I was also taking Prestique. I was also taking propranolol. And so anyways, now I'm on this huge cocktail of drugs, and, I'm just coming unglued. I mean, I can't think straight. I'm having all these debilitating, physical symptoms. I'm getting sick all the time. I'm getting these weird sores on my body. I was getting optical. What are those called? An optical. I forget what it was. It was kind of like where an optical seizure, I think is what it's called.
Interesting. Okay.
It could be wrong, but it was
what is that? Because I haven't heard of that one before. What were you experiencing?
It would happen at nighttime, and I would be looking at a light, and all of a sudden I would see these like rings start to form around light, and they would start to kind of pulse. And I'm like, what is that? It was so strange. And along with that, I would get this overwhelming sense of panic. And like I had to run, and then my vision was just skewed, and everything I looked at looked like it had a halo around it. Wow. And that would last for like 5 to 10 minutes, and then it would go away. So guess what I did? I go to my doctor. Actually, I went to a walk-in doctor, and he gave me a prescription of Valium to take on top of everything that I was taking. So
why do you think it was so easy for you to get these meds? Because not everyone is able to kind of get, like, was it like where you were living? Did you just like present really well? Like how did you I guess I'm surprised that, or maybe it was just back then at that time,
Right. That's a good question. For one, I was in Florida, and I think maybe that had something to do with it. Although they had shut a lot of the pain clinics down there at that time, there were still a lot of places. I don't know. I would just go in, and I felt like maybe it was the addict in me who, loved to manipulate people at the time, and was less than forthright. I think I kind of knew the right keywords to say. Although I don't know, maybe I'm giving myself too much credit. Maybe it was just dumb luck, and I was just walking into places and I was getting it so easily. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, the interesting thing during all of this is, I mean, there's like two stories here for me, which are kind of running in parallel. I'm obviously interested about the benzos and eventually the protracted withdrawal injury, but the other story is one of addiction. And so there's addiction kind of going on at the same time. On top of that, like somehow through all of this, you've gotten a BA and you have a teaching job, and it sounds like you started like a family as well. Like were you so fill in some of the gaps for me. So so when you were struggling with your opiate addiction, was it pain pills? Was it heroin? Was this a daily thing? Was this experimenting? Like what was the story of that, kind of juxtaposed next to all of this going on?
Yeah, good question. So I experimented with heroin and any opiate that I could get my hands on when I was more in my early 20s. And then as I got older, went back to the college, got my degree, settled down, got married, had a kid, had a family, went into teaching. I didn't, want to run the streets and get heroin from dealers and stuff. So I just went the pain pill route. And that was something, again, to your point before, it was so strange because I was always finding a way, whether it was through a dentist. One time I broke my finger and I got pain pills for over a year just from that one broken finger. I was always trying to con doctors, scheme, lie, manipulate to try to get what I needed. And I consistently found a way to get what I needed.
Wow.
So it was pain pills. It was pain pills most of the time that was kind of running concurrent. To my whole other addiction that was going on. Yeah.
How did all of this like kind of fit in with, I guess, your married life? I mean, I don't know if you mind me kind of asking about that. Was this something that your wife was worried about, or was it, just, I don't know, like how did all of this kind of being on all of the meds and the pain pills, how did that fit into that relationship?
It was horrible. It was absolutely awful. Yeah. I mean, me being who I was at the time, I was always having to hide my addiction because I was so ashamed of it. And I hid it from my wife. I hid it from my family. I had a lot of shame. I had a lot of guilt over what I was doing. And I just couldn't find the means to stop. And I was really trying. I mean, I was reading books. I was trying to meditate. I was trying to do anything that I could to stop. And I just couldn't for any length of time. I mean, I would maybe stop for a week or two. Yeah. And then, something would happen and I would be right back doing it. And so it made my relationships an absolute mess. It made my job a mess with my employer. I felt horrible. I felt horrible about what I was doing. I felt terrible that I was a teacher and I had, kids to look after every single day. And I knew what I was doing. Nobody else knew, but I knew. Yeah. And it made me feel awful. So yeah, it took a toll on everything. It just about ended my marriage. It ended relationships. It ended jobs. So it left a big trail of disaster.
And your marriage lasted through all of this. It sounds like.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow. How long have you been? Yeah. I was going to ask what anniversary is it? Yeah.
Today actually is my 13th anniversary.
Okay.
So it lasted somehow. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful,
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Incredible. And you just had the one kid, or do you have another?
I had another. So I had my daughter when in 2011, and I just had a son. He'll turn 4 next month.
Holy. Okay. All right. Wow. Yeah. All right. And so, I mean, how was this? Like, what was the impact of kind of the addiction with the opiates and the pain pills when you were a teacher, and all of those things? How was that like playing out on the day to day?
Oh man, it was bad. I was just barely trying to hold life together by a thread. And, the times when I had the pills and, I would have enough to get me through, I could kind of coast just enough just to get by, and fake it just enough to do the bare minimum to keep my job, to teach the lessons and do what I needed to do. But then, of course, as any opiate addict will know, there always comes a time when you can't get any, and you're looking to, on a Friday you run out and you got to be back at work on Monday, and you're like, oh my God, this is going to be horrible. So there were many days when I was sweating, I had the chills, and it looked like I just kept getting the flu every couple months.
Wow.
Okay. And I was detoxing in class, so it was terrible.
How distracting! Yeah, I mean that sounds horrible. And I mean, there's so many threads here, but I'm just going to jump on it because I'm naturally curious about it. Looking back on your life, what primed you to kind of walk down this path? I'm sure it's something you've talked about now that you're so kind of doing more of the coaching work. How do you make sense of like how you were primed to kind of fall into this?
How I fell into addiction I'm not sure. I've thought about it a whole lot. Yeah. I think, nature and nurture both play into this. I know, addiction, they call it a family disease. There's things in my past that I just did not process, traumas that I had unprocessed that I did not know how to deal with, that came out emotionally. And even through all the psychological work that I did with people, very good psychologists that I had too, very well trained, very reputable. I couldn't shake something inside of me. That's the best way I can describe it. There was still always this like leftover piece of some emotional turmoil that still felt like I couldn't get it out of me. It was still theirs. And I thankfully, throughout the last 8 years have found ways to deal with that too.
And so it wasn't like you had an injury or anything like that, and then you started taking opiates that way. It was more like there was psychological pain, and using these medications and these different drugs was like soothing for that. Is that kind of more what it was like? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I could say I had a concussion or something and blame it on that, but no, it was completely emotional for me. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And okay. And so take us back. Things. So we're going back to what year is it now? When you're on the drug that kicks ass and things are unraveling. When is that?
So that would be 2000. The end of 2014 is when I started that cocktail. Okay,
so walk us forward from there. Things are unraveling. You're on a lot of stuff at the time. Let's go forward from there.
Sure. Yeah. That's when I really started to become unglued, because I was taking Suboxone. So I wasn't taking opiates any longer, because, as I'm sure you know, that it blocks the craving aspect of wanting to take opiates. However, I wasn't getting the therapeutic effects that I was finding in opiates. So I was also emotionally coming unraveled too. So I'm taking 5 milligrams of benzos, of Klonopin a day, more Suboxone than I need, all these other drugs. And I just went downhill fast. I mean, the job, I was working a menial job. They didn't want me there any longer because I started to go into mental health facilities and just, zonk out for like a week or two at a time. I would just check myself in and just sit there in my robe and like watch TV for a week or two. I just was finding it increasingly difficult to deal with life. I just couldn't do it anymore. I was starting to check out. I was starting to have suicidal ideations. And I just wanted out. I was done. I was emotionally done. But at the same time, I had a wife and I had, a beautiful daughter that I wanted to stick around for. So it was absolutely miserable. And around 2015 in the spring, my family approached me and said, I think you need some help. Would you be willing to go to a treatment center? And I said, at first, no. And then they kind of said, well, I think it would be a good idea. You can get off these drugs, get off all the medications, you can get back down to see what your baseline is. And finally, I was just so tired. I was just so sick of everything. The place online said it had a pool. That enticed me. I was like, cool, I'll just go, hang out for like 30 days and go swimming. Turns out the place didn't have a pool, so they did a bait and switch. Yeah. But I decided to go, and that's when the story gets a little bit more interesting as far as
let me ask you this, because like at that point it was really obvious to your family that's just like, and I know you probably got wrecked at that treatment facility, but like being in that place where this is more of an addiction type of thing, where your family is just like, man, Dan, we need to get you some help. Why do you think it was hard for you to see at that time, and you kind of begrudgingly went because, oh, maybe I'll hang out at a pool? What's that disconnect like when the people that love you are just like, hey, we got to get Dan help, but you're just like checked out, whatever, like given up? What's that like?
That's a good question. Yeah, everybody else can see it but the addict. Yeah. Everybody in my life could see that I was struggling, that I needed help, that I needed to get off these drugs. But I was still kind of kicking and screaming. I was the one still saying, I'm fine, leave me alone. I got my Suboxone now. I'm not taking opiates anymore. The benzos are, I'm stabilized on them. Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm checking myself into mental health facilities. I want to kill myself. My life is in the toilet. I can barely work. But, yeah. The capability and I guess the way I can rationalize things in my head when I'm in addiction is it's absolutely crazy. There's I have no shortage of means of rationalizing something away. And, so them telling me, it still wasn't really getting through. The only reason that I went was because I thought I could kind of check out a life for 30 days. That's really why I went. Yeah. I really didn't think I needed help.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. All right. Yeah. So carry on. So you go to this place, this facility. Is it down in Florida or somewhere else?
Yep. Yep. Down in South Florida. Yeah. The rehab capital of the world down there. Yeah.
Okay. So what happens?
So I got checked in, and I met with a psychiatrist upon arrival who checked me out, looked at all the drugs I was taking. And she said, oh yeah, we'll keep you comfortable and we can have you off of everything in 9 days. And I wouldn't say I was completely naive at the time. I mean, I knew you couldn't just abruptly quit a benzodiazepine. I just, I didn't do any research. I didn't look into a taper. All I knew was that I was at this place for 30 days. They said they were going to take me off. I questioned whether or not I was going to be okay, but they said, no, it's fine. We'll give you some gabapentin. We've got other drugs, muscle relaxers. We'll keep you comfortable. You'll be fine. You'll be good. And so I just went with it. I didn't know any better.
Did they care that you were on like, Vyvanse and Prestige, I think you said, and like some other things? Were they just going to clear you out, or was it just like, hey, we just care about like the controlled substances, Suboxone, Klonopin, and Vyvanse?
I think they took me off the Suboxone quicker. I think that was maybe, 7 or 8 days. But pretty much they took me off of everything. By day 9, I was off of everything except the Prestige. They forgot to take me off the Prestige. Okay. They actually left that in. Yeah. Which I was told actually made my detox worse, but I don't know.
Because it's like stimulating, right? And you probably don't need that when you're coming off downers.
Oh God, no, no, that's the last. That was the last thing that I needed for sure. But it was it was a mess. It was just an absolute mess. If you want me to go into, I can start talking about that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm intrigued. Yeah. How do you can you explain what that hell was like?
I can try to do my best. Yeah. It's, a lot of it's foggy, but, on day 9, I think I still felt okay after 24 hours after coming off of it. And then I think it was somewhere after 24 hours. I remember they had you go to groups in treatment, and they would kind of give you structure throughout the day. You go to one group, they shuffle you off to another group. And I got to my second or third group of the morning, I think, after being off this now for over 24 hours, off of everything. And I just felt the worst panic, dread, holy crap, I'm going to die feeling I've ever felt in my life just come over me. And I just said to myself, oh, this is not good. This is bad. Whatever is happening right now is bad. I felt it in my brain, in my body. And from there, I just started to descend pretty fast after that, where the next conscious thought I have is being in this, we had like 3 beds to a room, and my bed was all the way against the wall. And I had my hoodie pulled up over my head, and I was staring at this brick wall next to me, just rocking back and forth, sweating, shaking, because I was coming off of Suboxone at the same time. So I'm also sick.
Wow.
I'm, having to run to the bathroom about every 20 minutes. And I'm psychologically, I was out of my mind. So I was losing touch with reality fast in the sense that I was really going into psychosis, where I forgot where I was at, what I was doing, what was happening. And all I knew was that I was sick in this place. Sounds hurt my head. I wanted to die. I felt like I was in hell. The anxiety was through the roof. My heart was pounding in my chest. I couldn't make sense of left or right, up or down. I would go into the shower to just try to get a little bit of relief. And the shower, the water felt like pins and needles hitting my body. It was so painful. And then I would just get out of the shower and I would lean over the toilet and just start crying and, sobbing and asking God to please save me from this, because I don't know what to do. I couldn't even hardly get words out. I mean, speech was almost completely erased from me at that point. It was so hard. I didn't know what to do, where to go. What the hell do I do?
So how long did you make it there before they kicked you out? Because I imagine, like, if you were that bad, I mean, I'm sure someone probably eventually realized they're like, hey, Dan is really like not doing well. Like,
oh my God, you would think so, right? Yeah, no. I mean, for 3 days, nobody even checked on me, Joseph. Nobody. Okay. I mean, I was just sitting there writhing, and, and my roommates were like, holy crap, you need help. I had to go across the hall after, I think it was on day 3, and I had to talk to one of the doctors, and I threatened suicide. Basically, I told him I was going to kill myself, which I was really thinking about doing, and I was quite serious about it. So then they, shipped me off to the hospital. They gave me some IV fluids. They kept me for a while for observation and sent me back.
So they didn't put you back on any benzodiazepines. They didn't slow it down. They didn't say, hey, okay. So they send you back.
They just sent me back, and I was begging them. I was like, look, you guys took me off way too, I know that much now.
5 milligrams of Klonopin. Good God, man. Jesus. Yeah.
Right. After taking benzos for 13 years too. So I was on them a long time. Yeah. And the 5 milligrams was a huge dose. But no, I was asking them, I was saying, please get me back on these meds and give me a slower taper so that I can function, because I can't function. So they sent me back to another hospital after, I don't know, I came back. It's foggy, but I know I went to hospital visit number 2. They Baker acted me that time, probably because, the suicide threats that I was making. Brought me back to the hospital, kept me there overnight, and that's when I went into the deepest psychosis, not sleeping, but I was in my bed at the psych ward overnight. that's a whole other story.
So you went into full on like essentially like DTs. I mean, delirium tremens from like benzodiazepines. And this, I mean, this is, maybe more for the audience. It sounds like you know what this is, but sometimes when people come off alcohol really quickly, they become acutely psychotic and they hallucinate and they essentially lose all touch with reality. And shortly after that, they usually die if it's not treated. They develop a seizure, and if the seizure doesn't stop, they go into cardiopulmonary arrest. They stop breathing and they die. And that can happen with benzodiazepines. It's the only two drugs that can kill you when you detox. And so you're really on your way there. And the other comment I just want to make, just, for those out there who don't know how much 5 milligrams of Klonopin is, it's a 1 milligram of Klonopin is essentially 2 of Ativan. When someone comes into an emergency room who is someone who is naive on benzodiazepines, and you need to acutely sedate them because they're like tearing the place up and throwing things around, they give you 2 of Ativan. And so you're at the point where you were getting like a dose that we would use to take down like someone in mania who was like agitated. You were getting that 5 times a day, and they pulled you off that, in 9 months. So it doesn't surprise me that you essentially went into psychosis. But what happened after that? Tell us about the psychosis. What do you remember, and then what happened?
Sure. Yeah. So I remember getting to the psych ward. I remember them having me take off all my clothes. They gave me the gown. And I was trying to call my sister to get me out of there. Like, my plan was to escape. I just said, I've got to get out of here. But I couldn't remember her phone number, and I couldn't dial the phone. I couldn't make my mind do it. I didn't have the capacity intellectually to make that happen. So I just said, okay, I'm here. There's nothing else I can do. I came from the treatment center. I'm at the psych ward. I can't get out of here. I'm locked in here. They're going to keep me here. And I just have to ride it out for however long I'm in here now. So that night, I'm in my room. I'm in there with another guy, and he's sleeping in the bed across from me. And the psychosis was just raging. I mean, I was hallucinating. I was hearing things that weren't there, like disembodied voices. Again, I'm still sick from coming off the Suboxone, so I'm still having to go to the bathroom, every 15, 20, 30 minutes. So I'm physically absolutely sick from that. The images that were like going through my head, the intrusive thoughts, the psychosis, it was just, I was absolutely insane. Like, I was out of my mind. And the best way I can describe it is that it felt like every insane person that had ever slept in that psych ward, like their psyche was jumping into mine.
Oh my God.
And messing with my head. And I thought that was it. I thought I was going to lose it. And during this time, the doctors from the treatment center called my wife and said that I had a 50-50 shot of coming out of the psychosis that I was in. And so she's at home freaking out.
Which they had caused, by the way. You didn't have the psychosis before you went there. Yeah. Just so you know, we've got your husband in a state where he has a 50% chance of ever regaining his sanity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're taking good care of him. Yeah, exactly. But something interesting did happen to me that night where, in the midst of all the chaos that was going on, the psychosis, the insanity, I have what I can only describe as a spiritual experience where I completely, it's hard to describe, but I feel like I gave up trying to control any of how this was going to turn out. And I just said, I can't do this. I am obviously in a place where I'm completely at the mercy of anything and everyone around me. And I can't even, advocate for myself at this point. And I felt something come into me, go through me, and happen within me that showed me like, it's going to be okay. Just go back to the treatment center when they send you back, go through the process, and you're going to be okay. It doesn't mean I felt better all of a sudden, the symptoms went away, but that was very powerful. And I do remember that very, very specifically.
Were you religious kind of through all of this, or was religion, God? I'm going to assume Christianity. I don't know, just because it's Florida. I don't know what.
It's a good assumption.
Yeah. What was your previous history with religion and everything like that leading up to this?
Yeah, so I grew up Christian in a Christian household, but I walked away from that when I was probably 16 or 17 years old. And never really looked back on it, and I was definitely not religious when this happened.
Okay.
I didn't, I didn't have any concept of a higher power. I wasn't against it. I was probably just what you would call agnostic.
Okay.
I just didn't really care one way or the other.
So what did you think was happening to you when you had this like experience? Like, was it God? Was it how did you understand it?
At the time, I don't know if I thought that it was God or what it was. I think shortly afterwards, I figured that it was God, whatever God is,
Yeah, sure.
I don't define what God is, but shortly thereafter, I did talk about it with some of the spiritual counselors at the treatment center, and I started kind of beginning to integrate that experience into my life. And now I definitely do call it a higher power or God or something working in my life at that moment when I needed something badly. I mean, I was so desperate, and I was just at my wit's end. I mean, I was rock bottom. If there was a rock bottom in my life, I mean, that was it. And something happened to help propel me forward, to help carry me through that experience. But it was a process of integrating that experience. I don't know if I could have called it God at that moment. I just knew that something internally was happening and did happen.
Okay, so walk us forward from. So I guess, did they put you back on some benzos when you were like hallucinating, or did they just let you just like ride it out?
They did actually. Yeah, they gave me some Ativan when I first came into the psych ward. I think they gave me one dose, maybe though.
Okay.
Just maybe enough to take the edge off a tiny bit for a couple hours.
So like enough that you wouldn't have like a seizure, and then that was probably, and then you just kind of rode the rest out until it settled.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So walk us forward from there. What happened after you left the inpatient setting?
Yeah. So they sent me back to the treatment center after that. I think I was only there overnight because there was a tropical storm coming in, and they knew they were going to get an influx of people off the streets. And, they just like, okay, this guy can go back to his treatment center. He's stabilized or whatever, psychotically stabilized. We'll send him out.
Yeah.
So I just went back to my treatment center, and that was probably the beginning of September or the end of August in 2015. And I stayed there for another 4 weeks. And slowly it was, oh my God. I mean, it was torture. It was absolute torture. They gave me the gabapentin, I think 1,400 milligrams a day. They kept me on the propranolol. They tried to put me back on an antidepressant, and I just said, no, I'm done. I'm not taking any other meds except, these two that are going to maybe help save my life and give me a fighting chance going forward. So I just clawed and fought my way. And over the next 4 weeks, I really did. I want to use the word miraculous, but really, I started to very slowly get incrementally better each week. I attribute part of that to the gabapentin. If it wasn't for that, I don't think I would have made it. I think I would have, I just couldn't have done it. So I know that it helped me at least get my head above water so that I could breathe. And I got out of there after 4 weeks. I went home and I started attending recovery meetings. My wife let me back in the house after a little while. I started to rekindle things, and, I stayed away from alcohol. I stayed away from opiates. I stayed away from other drugs. And it was and has been a long upward journey. It has not been linear healing, by any means. I still have benzo belly today. That was one of my worst symptoms. And that was the one a doctor told me would actually be the last one to leave. And so far he's right.
So what were so when you you were getting better after the 4 weeks, but what was the residual that you left the rehab with in terms of the protracted type symptoms?
Oh yeah. Anxiety was sky high. Just off the charts. If somebody would come up behind me and I didn't know they were there and they would just touch me on the back, I would jump. I was extremely jumpy. I couldn't sleep. I just, more than maybe a couple hours a night, I just felt awful in my skin. I felt absolutely awful. Vision issues. I couldn't see straight. My eyes couldn't focus. Intense head pressure that just would not go away. Skin issues. My skin was always dry. Muscle wasting, where I could not put on muscle at all. I was really, really skinny, and I'm a pretty thin person to begin with. Just a list of symptoms that were really, really, really hard. And the anxiety was just, it was excruciating. I mean, just to walk into a grocery store, I could barely function. I could barely have a conversation with somebody because, I would just tense up and I couldn't hardly breathe. Everything was so overstimulating. Sounds were amplified. It's like when I heard sounds, it's like I could feel it in my jaw and my teeth. Luckily the worst of it was definitely behind me, but what I was left with, the residual, made it extremely difficult to live a normal life.
Did you have any of the neuropathy? I know sometimes people have that. Sometimes people go through a stint of pacing. Any, like in neuropathy, like the tingling and the pain and the burning. I was wondering if you had any of that stuff going on at any point.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I definitely did. Yeah. I had it in my lower back really badly, in my legs. It wasn't the worst symptom that I had, but I definitely had it. And I definitely had akathisia for a while where I could not sit down to save my life. I constantly had to keep moving. I needed constant forward momentum. I definitely had nerve pain. I feel like it was the worst in my back. I would get it. Oh my God. It just, especially in the mornings. Mornings were always the worst. That's when I feel like I always had it.
Okay. And so what was how did things kind of fall off after 2015 when you get out of this rehab, and obviously you're not psychotic anymore and that's gone? What was the process of getting through, this state of insomnia, agoraphobia, pain and all of that? How did that play out over the next couple of years?
So I got my first job at 6 months off of everything. And, it was just by necessity. I had to go back to work, and it was scary. It was excruciating. But I found a job that I could do that wouldn't cause me too much stress. And, it was so hard, but I think for me, the part of the exposure of doing that, I think helped me. I was learning to take life one day at a time. I was learning a lot in my recovery community from people who had come before me, not necessarily had come off of benzos. There were very few of those people in my recovery meetings. But just people showing me kind of how to live life and get quiet and meditate and pray and practice gratitude and do all these things that I was just desperate to try just to see if it worked. And slowly along the way, I found that a lot of these things were working. Also, I was on the gabapentin, and I know that helped me. There was a doctor right before I left the treatment center who, I was talking to him right before my discharge, and I said, I don't want to take anything. I want to be off of all these drugs. I don't want to have to taper this. I'm just going to leave these at the door and put this behind me. And he suggested to me not to do that. He said, stay on these drugs as long as you need to and give yourself a softer landing and see how that goes for you. And I believe he was right, because at 6 months, between 6 months and a year, I tried to just stop the gabapentin, and of course I couldn't do that either. So that became a process of having to taper off that as well.
Yeah. You're probably aware of this. 12-step gets a lot of flack in the benzo community because so many people have kind of been forced into it when they, it's a kind of a different situation, taking it as prescribed and all of that, and they don't have the addiction background. Was there any did you experience any of that with 12-step, or was it a good fit for you? Because you had the addiction background, was it kind of compartmentalized? You could go to 12-step and talk about the addiction, but maybe the protracted withdrawal symptoms, that wasn't something that it dealt with so much. But then also when I hear you talk, it sounds like some of the general stuff was also helpful for protracted withdrawal. I'd love to get you kind of download your thoughts on going through protracted withdrawal injury with 12-step and that kind of methodology?
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a great question too, and I'm glad you brought that up because I would hate for anybody to be stigmatized as an addict like me when they're absolutely not. You know, most people on benzos and benzo damaged who become damaged by benzos were definitely not addicts. They did take it as prescribed. So thank you for bringing that up. But for me, you know, I think just the process that people were able to show me on how they got through their addiction and how they found healing by, you know, trying to help others, by meditating, by having this life of spirituality definitely helped me because it kept me in a good state of mind where otherwise I could have easily sunk, you know, so many times. I mean, it was hard enough going through benzo withdrawal and going to meetings. But I suspect, you know, if for me personally, if I was kind of left on my own to deal with a lot of the troubling symptoms and a lot of the thoughts, I think I first of all, I don't think I'd be around here today, but I think my healing would have taken a lot longer because they just, they showed me a way to, if nothing else, distract myself just by going to meetings. Sometimes distraction is key, just to be able to, you know, get out of your head for a little while. I mean, all the troubling symptoms were still there. And I had a couple people who had been through benzo withdrawal, not to the extent at all that I did, but were familiar enough with it to try to help me and talk to me. And, you know, they would be there on the phone with me if I needed to talk to somebody, you know, at midnight and stay on the phone with me for an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes when I was just coming apart and I was coming unglued and I'm like, I can't deal with this anymore. It's overwhelming. You know, life is hard enough, but try living life when you're in protracted benzo withdrawal. I mean, it's a real nightmare. Yeah. So I was definitely grateful that I had that.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, that's a lot of the same stuff that gets people through in a lot of the online communities. I mean, they kind of team up, they find a buddy, someone that they get along with, and, you know, the personalities match, and they're just kind of there for each other, and
right.
kind of distract them as they get through it. What job were you doing? What job were you able to work while all of this was going on? That's yeah.
So I was mixing paint at a hardware store for people. So people would, you know, come in and take their little color palette off the wall, hand it to me. And luckily all I had to do was take the paint can, open the lid, put it underneath a machine, and then hit the button. It would shoot the paint in, it would mix it, and I would give it back to them.
Okay.
So it was very simple, but it was good because, you know, in retrospect, it got me kind of out a little bit, and it got me trying to have a normal conversation with somebody, which I think was helpful.
What was that like, trying to do that job while all of this stuff was going on? Like the intense agoraphobia, going to work, like not sleeping, like obviously just feeling terrible. I mean, I don't know if you could like remember what it was like walking into that job the first week. Like what, like...
Oh, it was awful. It was terrifying. Yeah. So we would open at like 5 a.m. And we would have to take all the big lawnmowers, you know, the big tractors, and push them out the double doors and line them up outside. And, you know, normally for me, that's not a big deal, but I was in such pain. I mean, I remember that being so hard, especially in the morning, because the symptoms were always worse in the morning. My nerves were always shot, you know, they were just completely fried. So, you know, pushing these things out the door at 5 a.m., getting them all lined up, it was, it sucked. It was really hard.
Yeah.
It was really hard. And then sometimes just even, you know, mixing paint for people with, like you said, the agoraphobia, just the intense anxiety. It was awkward. It was hard. It was tough. It was tough. Luckily, I worked with some guys who were, some, you know, real jokesters. So it was kind of, it lightened it up a little bit, but it was not easy. It definitely was not easy.
And so how long were you in that state for before your nervous system was able to re-regulate and you could kind of get some physiologic peace?
Ooh. It was a slow process. I think at least 2 years. I'm going to say it was 2 years before I really started to feel like I was kind of getting back to normal. I mean, it's hard to say because I had a lot of windows that would come and go, where I had sometimes an entire day and a half where I'd feel okay. But that was always followed up by a really, really bad wave every single time. I mean, I would just get completely smacked the next day after having a window. So I definitely had times, moments of clarity, moments of these windows where I got some relief. I do know that around 9 months, I turned a corner because everybody that I was talking to in my meetings started to say, you look better. You know, you look like you got some color back in your face. You sound a little bit better, and you just seem like you're doing a lot better. So I know that there was something also around 9 months, but for me, the way I felt really internally, I think it was really a couple of years before I felt like I could sit down without pacing, without feeling like, you know, I was just going to be completely bombarded with horrible symptoms and really be at peace with myself. And it was very, very slow. And even after that 2 years, it still took a couple more years for some of the other symptoms to subside. So it's been a long process for me.
How is your marriage able to survive this? I mean, I'd love to hear about this from your perspective. What made it possible for you guys to get through? Maybe all the credit will go to your wife. I don't know, but I just like to I just like to get your perspective on how that relationship stayed intact with you being sick and then having all these symptoms, and you have obviously a young kid who needs to be cared for and needs attention, and it's so demanding, that time in your life, you know, when with like young children. Like, how did you guys make it through?
It was my wife's patience. That must be how. I don't know. Yeah. She's a much more patient and caring person than I am. Yeah. It was extremely difficult. I mean, my daughter turned 4 years old when I was in treatment. And I was just telling somebody this the other day. So her birthday is on September 10th, and I came off of everything the end of August.
My daughter's birthday is on September 10th as well.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. No way.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, so her birthday is on the 10th. I had come off of everything the end of August. So, I mean, I was just coming out of psychosis. I was just coming out of the psych wards when they let me make my first phone call home. And that was one of the hardest days of my life. Never mind the psychosis that I had just barely survived. I mean, I remember picking up the phone and calling, and just, it was wrecked me. I mean, because at that point, I mean, I was so damaged. I had no idea what was going to happen, if I was ever going to even, feel okay again, if I was going to get my mind back. I didn't know if this was permanent. I mean, I was absolutely petrified of everything at that point. But, no, to my wife's credit, I mean, she's amazing. And she's, when I first got out of treatment, our marriage was really hanging by a thread. I mean, we had pretty much, had to leave our house due to my addiction. And she moved my daughter into a townhouse and the next town over to get into better schools. While I was in treatment, she was running the household, taking care of my daughter, making sure, she was getting her into, better schools, feeding her, doing everything. And when I got out, it was like, okay, let's see how this happens. She was willing to give me a chance. And she also, interestingly, said that she could see that something in me had changed. And I believe it was definitely as a result of that spiritual experience that I had had in that psych ward. Everybody saw it in me and said that I kind of had this glow about me. And she just said, oh my God, I feel like I have the old Dan back. I feel like you're a different person. And in a lot of ways, I was. There was still a lot of healing and a lot of things that I had to work through for sure. And there always will be. I'm certain of that. But it was a slow process for sure. Like I said, she's an incredibly patient, incredibly kind, and amazing, amazing person. And the fact that it did survive is probably a miracle, because I did about everything that I could have done in my addiction and through the benzo damage to, give her every opportunity that she could have possibly used to walk away, and she would have been justified.
Yeah. Wow.
So,
that's incredible. She sounds incredible as well. I mean, hats off to the wives out there, and who,
right.
who stand by while this goes on. But Dan,
Absolutely.
So the next thing I want to ask you about is, I know you do coaching now. Tell me about like what was like the progression from like mixing paint up to now having your own website and your coaching business, which you launched. Walk us through the steps from how you got from there to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. So after mixing paint, I took some jobs in sales for a few years and kind of bounced from one to another. Up until this past year where I was still doing sales, and I started my YouTube channel about a year ago. So about last August 2022. Mm-hmm. And I just made a video describing my experience just because I thought, you know what, there's got to be so many other people who have gone through benzo withdrawal, benzo damage, and are going through it. What if I just made a video just saying my experience? You know what? Screw it. I don't care what anybody thinks about it. I'm just going to put it out there. And so I did, and I uploaded it, and I got a pretty big response, and just a lot of people started reaching out to me right away and commenting and saying, where they were in the process, that they knew somebody who was going through it. And then I started making another video, and it kind of picked up a little bit of momentum from there. And I had a lot more people reaching out to me, and eventually people were saying, or asking me, I should say, would you be interested in talking to me or providing coaching? And at first I'm like, no way, I can't do that, because it just didn't feel right to me. I felt like I was, I don't know, I don't want to make money off this. I don't want to take money from people who are suffering. And I was having this conversation with a friend of mine who's a physical coach who does online coaching. And he said, well, Dan, if people are asking you for that, maybe there's a purpose for it. And if you don't offer that, maybe you're actually doing people a disservice. So it kind of shifted my mindset around it to where I thought, maybe he's right. Maybe this really would help people. So in just April this last year, just a couple months ago, I set it up, I put it out there, and I just said, hey, anybody that's interested, you can sign up for a call now, and let's see how it goes. And man, from the first call, I felt like it was a calling for me. I felt like everything about it felt right. I felt like I was doing something helpful. I felt like I was doing the right thing. And, now, I'm not doing it full time yet, but I would love to, because it feels so right, everything about it. But it was just kind of a fluke transition where people were reaching out to me, asking me about it.
That's incredible. Yeah. I mean, I have no doubt that you're going to be successful, because the fact that the story starts with people were knocking on my door asking me if I would help them, it means that there's something there already. I mean, there's no better way to start than people coming after you, asking for your help, even if you're not even offering it. It's not like you had a sales page up or anything like that. It was just like, hey, philosophical fishing. Tell me about that. Where's the name come from?
So yeah. So when I first started it, I initially started on Instagram, and I think it was during the pandemic I had the idea of coming up with something where I could kind of combine all my passions for philosophy, spirituality, recovery, and fishing, which is another one of my passions. So I'm like, well, whatever, I'm not really a social media guy. I'll just put this page together. It'll just be for fun, whatever. We'll see what happens. So that's where the name Philosophical Fishing came from. And then I just applied that same name to my YouTube channel. And I don't know, I felt like, even though I don't talk about fishing, it can be taken in a different context. So it just kind of carried over, and I've just stuck with it.
Are you, what do you think about, I guess, mental health, the way mental health is treated? This is going really broad now, the way mental health, addiction, I'm not going to say addiction. I'm going to say mental health and such is treated in the US these days. What's your perspective on it?
How mental health is treated?
Yeah, people who have problems with depression and anxiety. Yeah.
Well, I think it's very clinical, and I think that there's a use for it. I don't think it's completely to be discounted if it helps somebody. by the same token, and I can really only speak on my experience, is that I've gone down those avenues. I've spoken to a lot of therapists, a lot of counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists, and I think some very well-meaning people who really wanted to help me and who are very qualified. However, by the same token, for me personally, and maybe it's me as an addict or maybe it's just me as a human being, I don't feel like anything that was done for me got to the root of what I really needed in order to heal.
Holy shit. Okay. What did you need to heal? I mean,
I think I needed a spiritual experience in a psych ward.
Yeah.
I think that's what I needed.
Yeah.
I'm not, I think, really, honestly, I think that, the things that I have incorporated into my life that I've learned that people have showed me, such as simple things, practicing gratitude, humility, helping others, living a life of service, and trying to keep those principles forefront in my life helped to heal me spiritually. And I didn't know I needed that. Like I said, I was an agnostic. I wasn't looking to those qualities as something that could be helpful in my life. So it's hard to say because I know that, I think the mental health system is flawed because of the drugs that they push. Obviously, that's a huge, huge issue. I think that goes without saying for sure. I mean, you can't just prescribe somebody something and expect that that's going to be a cure-all for their ills. Maybe there's a place for it in people's lives. I don't know. I would definitely never advocate for getting rid of that for people. Absolutely. But what I've found for me is that I needed something in addition to the therapy. I needed something in addition. And what I found was that the spirituality that I've practiced since coming off that has really been the biggest thing that I think has healed me.
And the spirituality, I mean, I guess for people who may not, that doesn't resonate with them or something like that, I know, like how much of the spirituality would you say is things just like meaning and purpose and things like that, maybe outside of that greater framework of there being a higher being? I don't know if it's possible for you to kind of tease out how much is what.
I think it's everything. I think the purpose that I find in helping other addicts in my recovery community, and the purpose that I find where I can take a lot of those same things that I've learned in my recovery community, working with other addicts and alcoholics. A lot of that translates to the coaching that I now do today. Not all of it for sure, but a lot of it. And having a purpose of being able to help other people and knowing that I get to do that today. I humbly get to help other people who are where I once was, and I get to reach out my hand and try to pull them up and pull them forward and try to show people, hey, there's another life waiting for you, either on the other side of addiction or on the other side of benzo damage. And, I'm saying it from my own experience that I've been through it. I've been where you are. I get it. And even though all our circumstances are different, I know what it's like to be at rock bottom. I know what it's like to be damaged by benzos. And I know that it's possible to come through the other side. And I think for me personally, having a purpose of getting to do that, being able to do that for other people, absolutely enriches my life. I mean, those purposes are everything to me today.
What allowed you to get so real with yourself? Because, like you talk about you before, you're just like, I was good at manipulating doctors, I was kind of like lying to myself. I was just, all of these things. And then you see you now, this radical like authenticity with like, this is who I was. This is what it was like, just like this full, it's like you fully see yourself. What was that transformation like? How did you get from there to where you are now?
I think desperation.
Okay.
Being so absolutely desperate. I was just completely wrecked. I mean, everything inside of me was just completely taken away. And I remember being at that psych ward and just thinking, or not at the psych ward, but at the treatment center. And I said to myself, if I ever get out of here and if I'm ever able to get my life back and my health back, I'm going to do everything that I can that I've either A, always been afraid to do, and B, I'm going to do everything I can to try to help other people in whatever capacity that looks like. I don't even know what that is. But out of that desperation sprang I think my whole life after that. It was a springboard into the rest of my life to really, really want to change. I had to get honest with myself. I had to get real with myself and look at where I was being dishonest, where I was being manipulative, and willing to be able to take a look at those things honestly and do an honest self-assessment, because I didn't like the person that I was when I was in my addiction. I didn't like the person that I was when I walked into that treatment center. I wanted to be a different person. I wanted to change. I wanted to be the person that I knew was inside of me, but that was just covered up. I just didn't know how to access that person. I didn't know how to get down to it. So I think for me, it took that butt kicking that I got, unfortunately, for me to get that. I'm a hard-headed person by nature. I don't easily change. I think I know what I know, and I stick to that, and I don't let anybody talk me out of that. But now, having gone through that experience, I know that is what gave me the honesty and the humility to get honest with myself and to have that life change.
Wow. That is so interesting. I really, really, really value your perspective on that, because like you said, the honesty and the humility, I mean, it shines through now. I mean, it's so real and authentic, and just and yeah, you definitely see it. So so in your work at the moment, Dan, do you, like, how much of it is like protracted withdrawal? How much of it is helping folks with addiction? Like, what does your practice look like?
In my coaching calls, it's mostly helping people who are where I used to be, and just, I think, looking for ways to try to navigate through benzo damage is so hard. The number one thing that everybody says is at the forefront of their mind, their main anxiety is, am I ever going to get better? Which was the same thing for me. I didn't know, am I going to heal from this? Am I going to be able to get to the other side? And, am I going to be normal again? And what is normal? I don't, it's been so long since I felt normal. People don't even know what normal is anymore, because they were on benzo so long and how they're damaged by them. And so, people need to see that there's somebody else who's come before them, who's been there and can talk the talk. And you see that, okay, here's a living demonstration of somebody who's been through it and has come out the other side, and can try to reach back down to somebody else who's suffering and show them, hey, here's what I did. Here's how I walked through this specific situation that you're dealing with, whatever it is. If somebody has a similar background of trauma that I had, I can speak to that and I can help walk through that. Here's what I've done, and here's what I can help show you. If you want to try to do the same things that I did, maybe it'll work for you too. Or somebody who's just, absolutely ravaged with benzo belly. I can look at specific things that either I had to stay away from dietarily, or things that I had to incorporate that helped, things that I do to try to navigate stress, anxiety, and all these tools that I've incorporated into my life that I believe have helped me get to where I am today, which has been, a long road over the last almost 8 years now. If I can take some of those things and show it to somebody else and just continue to be a living demonstration to them that they can also get there, I think that's the best thing that I can do. And hopefully it really gives somebody some true hope.
Wow. Okay. Great. Dan, I'm about out of questions. Do you have anything that you wanted to say before we wrap?
Thank you for what you do, Joseph. God, I mean, I think that, and you can tell me your thoughts on this if you want. I think there's a huge, huge wave about to crash in the world of people coming off of benzos. I know here in the US, I read that I think in 2020 during the pandemic, there was 30 million prescriptions of benzos written in that year alone, and it's only gone up. So I suspect there's a huge wave of people that are about to come off benzos here in the next few years that are really going to need help.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Well, all right, Dan, thank you so much for coming on and telling us your story.
Thanks a lot for having me, Joseph. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.